Hello, this is Addison from the Agency of Narrative Intrigue and Mystery, and welcome to this quick start video for how to hurt people in Eureka Investigative Urban Fantasy. So, because dangerous situations don't always involve fighting in Eureka, and even when they do, not every character is expected to be built for fighting. In the earlier dangerous situations video, I talked about turns and movements and actions, but not really anything to do with hurting people. This video has to do with the rules for hurting people. So, hurting people with guns specifically is something I'm going to cover in a separate video because the rules are a little different. So this video is going to be just about like unarmed fighting and melee weapons. Eureka is aiming to be a pretty grounded setting. Even if you really hate someone enough to like want to punch them in the face, that's a lot different from wanting to cut their throat or blow their head off, even if you own a gun. This is one of the reasons that unarmed fighting is probably the easiest type of fighting to encounter for characters in Eureka, because it's less lethal and less illegal than stabbing people with knives or shooting with guns. Most characters in Eureka won't even own weapons at all. They're expensive, especially guns, and realistically, most characters, even PCs, won't consider them a necessary purchase. Your average Eureka PC is a normal person. Even if they end up fighting some kind of paranormal monster, they didn't know that they were going to end up fighting a paranormal monster today, because they didn't even know that a paranormal monster existed until they stumbled onto a trail and got involved in some kind of mystery. And then once they do know, they've either got to go home and dig out like a hunting rifle that hadn't been shot in 3 years out of the closet and clean it to make sure it still works, or they got to go buy a gun and go through a background check and all that, and who knows what could happen in between now and then. Anyway, guns are very powerful, but there's a lot of common sense reasons why investigators won't always be using them. This doesn't mean that everyone involved is safe from death and bodily destruction just because they aren't any guns. We'll get to that. Still, most fights of any kind will probably and ideally not go to the death in Eureka. Real people don't normally fight like that. If they think they're going to lose, they'll surrender or run away. If somebody who's winning thinks that they're about to kill somebody, they will probably let up and let them get away. Investigators have to make composure rolls after a fight, and the modifier of the composure roll will be relevant to the most dangerous type of weapon that was used in that fight. A melee weapon, fists, or a gun. They also have to make a composure roll relevant to the type of weapon each time they take real damage from that type of weapon. So if they get shot by a gun, they have to make a gun composure roll. If they get punched in the face, they have to make a fist fighting composure roll. This will drop their composure as they take more hits in the fight. So there is nothing that literally forces the characters to run away, but the lower their composure, the worse their stats will be, and you know that if you watch any of the stuff about composure or read the rulebook about composure. And the lower their stats, the worse they will do in the fight, and the better idea it will seem like to run away or surrender or not get into a fight in the first place, probably. This same thing goes for NPCs too. Even though they don't actually have a composure stat, they do have what is called morale. Morale is kind of a really, really simplified composure that only matters in fights and dangerous situation and combat and stuff. NPCs will have a morale stat between 1 and 6, with 1 being completely cowardly and 6 being completely brave. Usually averages at around 2 or 3. This resets every single time they get into a fight. Morale can temporarily go up or down within a fight, and if it goes to 0, that tells the game master that this NPC is ready to run away or surrender. There's a list of specific situations in this section about what kind of situations will raise and lower morale. They'll be on screen about now. A lot of fights in Eureka will be ended by morale or composure before they're ended by damage. Basic attacks. This is the groundwork, the foundation, the basis for all attacks in Eureka. And like I mentioned in the dangerous situations video, the gameplay rules are pretty much the same in a dangerous situation than in a non-dangerous situation, except in a dangerous situation there's usually a turn order. When a character tries to attack another character, that's a 2d6 roll with the relevant skill. It could be throwing a punch, a kick, stabbing with a knife, swinging a pool cue or a baseball bat at somebody, whatever. If the point of the attack is just simply to like hurt somebody, the results are as follows. On a full success, the attack hits the target for full damage. The attacker manages to get past the target's defenses. This might also cause a composure roll or reduce morale, as you saw in the composure and morale stuff. On a partial success, the attack hits for half damage. It might also cause a composure roll or morale loss. If the attack was with a firearm, then it's also a bit different on a partial success, but I'll talk about that in the firearms video. On a failure, the attack fails to accomplish anything. It's a complete miss, it's completely blocked or parried or avoided in some way, and it doesn't do any damage. So in Eureka, characters do not have like an AC or like a dodge roll or anything like that. They aren't just standing there letting it happen, of course. The fact that they're assumed to be trying to like block, dodge, parry, avoid, backstep, step away, like stop this attack in some way, is why the attacker has to make a dice roll, like a skill check, in the first place in order to do damage. It's because somebody is trying to stop them from doing damage. There are some things covered by the rules that characters can do to protect themselves that I'll get to, but the smartest one is probably just not letting their opponent get any kind of attack at all. Once a character is making and attacking against another character, it is almost entirely up to the attacker's skill whether or not the target takes damage. If an attack is something like a punch or a kick or a headbutt or an elbow or whatever, it can be done using the athletic skill or the close combat skill. The athletic skill generally represents like a character's strength and stamina and like overall athleticism, and the close combat skill generally represents characters like training in like actual martial arts. A basic unarmed attack, like I mentioned, can benefit from either one of these skills, but not both at the same time. If it's an attack with a melee weapon like a knife or a club or something like that, then it has to use the close combat skill. I won't cover this in like full detail because I talked about it in the other dangerous situations video, but once somebody tries to hit somebody, game time is probably going to start being measured in turns and rounds. If the game time is being measured in turns and rounds, that means characters have a limited number of movements and actions they can do in their turn. I went into this in more detail in the dangerous situation video, but if you didn't watch that, then I'm going to break it down really briefly and simply here. Characters may have multiple movements, but only ever one action. That action, capital A action, also counts as a movement. Almost any kind of attack will count as an action with a capital A. There are rare exceptions, which I'll talk about later, where an attack counts as a movement and not an action, but usually it'll be an action. Right now, assume that attack is always an action, which means that they're limited to one per turn. This is where it gets a bit different when fighting is concerned. If the character that starts the danger situation by doing an attack or something is trying to like hit somebody, the person they're trying to hit, the target, always gets the second turn before regular epicenter initiative starts to apply. And in this situation, the target can try to make a full success on a reflexes check to act before the strike that's coming at them, and then they have the first turn, making the original attacker take the second turn. In a fight with like fists and melee weapons, the attacker and the target both get to take 2 turns before anyone else gets to take a turn, as long as they don't disengage from each other. If a character isn't always holding a weapon when the fight starts and they want to equip a weapon, then on their turn they can make a reflexes roll. If the weapon is a melee weapon, they could also, instead of reflexes, do a close combat roll. If it's a firearm, then instead of reflexes, they could do a firearms roll. If it's something that's like easy to get, like a weapon that's like in a holster or in their pocket, then that takes 0 movements on a full success, 1 movement on a partial success, and 1 action on a failure. If it's something that's like in a backpack or something that's like harder to get, then on a full success it takes 1 movement, on a partial success it takes 1 action, and on a failure it takes 2 actions, and therefore 2 turns in a row. On the topic of weapons, I'm going to talk about weapons and damage and what they can do to the human body. In the life and death quick start video, I talked about hit points, but I'll briefly remind you here. All humans and humanoid characters have two types of hit points: penetrative hit points and superficial hit points, and they have 5 of each. Superficial is for surface level stuff that heals easily. Penetrative is for stuff that doesn't heal easily. When characters are down to 1 of either type of HP, they make injury rolls and can end up crippled. Injury rolls also happen at 0 superficial HP, and any damage they take while they're already at 0 superficial HP. Also, when they have 0 superficial HP, any superficial damage they take will then take away from their penetrative HP. When they're at 0 penetrative HP, they just die immediately. So, human scale weapons in Eureka deal 1, 2, or 4 damage. It'll always be an even number unless it's just 1. No rolling for random amounts of damage, and there is no half or decimal point damage. If there is, you just round it up. We leave it mostly up to you to figure out how much damage a weapon should do, and if it should do penetrative or superficial damage, as long as you follow these guidelines pretty strictly. It's helpful to think of damage and HP as not being as much of an actual number as it is being just a easy way of determining if a character is badly wounded or not. In a lot of cases, it'll only take 1 attack with a weapon to force a target to make an injury roll. The distinction between penetrative damage weapons and superficial damage weapons isn't just like sharp weapons versus blunt weapons. A large or heavy or metal blunt weapon will almost definitely do penetrative damage. Like you can see here, a hammer and a baseball bat are both listed under penetrative damage here. A good rule of thumb is to think, if you hit somebody with this weapon, would they have to go to the hospital? If yes, then it's a penetrative damage weapon probably. An unarmed attack, like a punch, will pretty much always be superficial. But as you'll see later in the video, that does not mean it can't seriously injure somebody. Wearing protective clothing can reduce damage from attacks that hit by 50%. If the attack is a 1 damage attack that can't be halved, you instead subtract -2 from the actual dice roll itself. Like I said before, characters who are being attacked are assumed to be trying to defend themselves to the best of their ability. Armor cannot just be aimed around. The fact that anyone would have to aim around it in the first place is why it works. So it's always, if a character is wearing armor, that armor is always in effect unless there's some specific reason it isn't, as noted by the rulebook, which I'll get to in a minute, even if it doesn't cover the entire body. So if a target is wearing leather jacket, that counts as armor and protects them. You can't just say, well, my investigator is going to only aim for their legs so that they go around the armor. No, the armor still counts. The fact that the investigator has to aim around the armor is what makes the armor effective, and that just counts as half damage for mechanics purposes. Any worn item of clothing that could sufficiently impede damage being done to the character counts as armor. Biker suit, like you saw in that art above, a denim jacket, a leather jacket, a hard hat, a motorcycle helmet. Bullets will completely ignore most armor, but I'll cover what armor bullets cannot ignore in the guns video. Wearing 2 pieces of armor does not have the damage twice. So wearing a motorcycle helmet and a biker suit doesn't reduce it more than just the biker suit. There are benefits to wearing both, and that will be a bit more protective because there are benefits to wearing both, but I'm not going to cover those benefits in this quick start video. You'll have to read the rulebook. There are ways to bypass armor and even bypass HP entirely. A stealth attack, quote unquote, is any type of attack against a target that is within arm's reach and unaware or otherwise not resisting the attack. Because the target is not resisting, they don't usually require a dice roll at all. They can sometimes ignore armor if that makes sense for the situation, and they typically deal at least 4 damage. Sometimes they can even like kill instantly without bothering with going through hit points. This is all going to be pretty situation dependent, so I recommend you read this section of the rulebook in full to get the full idea and understand like the nuances of it, but now you know it's there to go read. There's a few special considerations to take into account when characters are fighting in close combat. If a character is outnumbered in a melee fight, then other characters have a contextual bonus to their attacks against that character that is outnumbered. That bonus will be equal to their numerical advantage. So if it's 5 guys against 1 guy, the attackers on the 5 guys side would get a +4 bonus to their attacks. That's enough to end a fight basically right away. Do not get on the wrong end of that situation, for sure. So even though characters are always assumed to be making moves to defend themselves from attacks, they can also spend an action on their turn to focus entirely on defense. This rule is called guarding. This gives attackers a -1 penalty to their attacks against the guarding character by default. But if the guarding character has a good modifier in close combat, that could be a -2 or a -3 as well. A -2 or a -3, that is significant. The more turns they guard in a row, though, the less effective guarding gets. It's also even less effective if they are unarmed and they're guarding against a melee weapon attack. And it just does not protect at all from bullets. Bullets are not affected by guarding. So if a character is trying to use a 2-handed melee weapon with 1 hand, the attacks with it will have a -2 penalty. If they're trying to fight with a weapon in each hand, making an attack with either weapon takes an action, and if they do it with their offhand, they have a -2 penalty. If they have at least a +1 rating in close combat, that's a rating, not a trait bonus, they can get a contextual bonus to their melee attacks with their main weapon based on the damage of the second weapon as seen here on screen. Also, using fists does not count as dual wielding. Also, longer melee weapons have an advantage against shorter melee weapons because the guy with the longer melee weapon can attack while staying farther back from the guy with the shorter melee weapon. This gives a penalty to the guy with the shorter melee weapon when they attack, as seen here on screen. Like I said in one of these other videos, in a fight, you just say what your character is going to do, and there'll probably be some kind of rule for it in the rule book. So I'm going to show off some of the cool rules for cool other stuff they can do in combat besides just hitting each other, because we have a lot of consideration for the different types of things somebody might try to do in a fight. Before I go over those, though, you need to understand the weight class rule and the counterattacks rule. So weight class in Eureka, it's capital W, capital C. In Eureka does not always mean literal weight. It's based on their athletic skill. If one of the special melee attacks below that I'm going to cover in a second mentions a weight class modifier, that is the difference between the athletics of the attacker and the athletics of the target. So if the attacker has a +3 total athletics bonus and the target has a +1 total athletics bonus, the attacker has a extra +2 weight class modifier when they make this skill check. The weight class modifiers can also be negative, like if somebody who is smaller and weaker is attacking somebody who's bigger and stronger with one of these special melee moves that involves the weight class modifier. A counterattack, capital C, capital A, is a special free attack that the target gets to make if the attacker screws up some kind of risky maneuver. If a maneuver is at risk of allowing a counterattack, it'll say so in the rules. Counterattacks do not take an action, and they do not take a movement, and they happen before the regular attacker's attack takes effect. A counterattack can either be a basic attack or one of the special maneuvers I'm about to get into, unless stated otherwise, and it'll say so in the rules for that maneuver. So before I end the video, I'm just going to really quickly go through a bunch of different maneuvers that we wrote rules for and explain what they are, but not really get into all the exact rules for them. If you want to know that, then read the rule book. Knowing these can save your investigator's life. Actually, I'm not even going to say it can. I think it will save your investigator's life at least once if you play Eureka more than a few times. And again, though, it's just you say what your character's going to do, and there will probably be a maneuver in the rule book, in this section of the rule book, that will have specific rules for it. So a knockout blow represents like a haymaker, a pretty well telegraphed unarmed strike. It has to be unarmed, can't be done with a melee weapon. Unarmed strike with like as much force as the attacker can put behind it. This can do a lot more damage than a regular unarmed melee attack. A regular unarmed melee attack is normally just 1 superficial damage. A knockout blow can do up to 4 superficial damage, which is enough to cause an injury roll in just 1 shot. However, trying to do this gives a big penalty, and on a failure, it can allow a counterattack from the target. A disarm is when a character is trying to take away a weapon from an opponent. This is extremely dangerous. It only works with the close combat skill, and it has a penalty to it, and it includes weight class, and on a partial success or a failure, it allows a counterattack from the target. And that counterattack can use the weapon. If it's a gun, a partial success or a failure on the disarm will get the person trying to do the disarm shot almost certainly. Shove is when a character is trying to like push or do like a tackle that is trying to like move the target backwards in some way. It can either use close combat or the athletic skill. It includes the weight class modifier, and it can result in a counterattack. So if a character tries to, grab an opponent and hold on to them, that would be a grab. It uses either close combat or athletic skill, and it includes weight class, and it can result in a counterattack. But something special about grabbing is that it can be done as a movement instead of an action, which means that potentially the character trying to do the grab can try it multiple times in one turn, unlike every other attack where it takes an action and they can only do it once per turn. However, trying to do that is risky because if every time they fail, they're going to get counterattacked. So it potentially allows them to get counterattacked multiple times if they just keep failing. Once a target is grabbed successfully, they can be thrown on the ground, they can be held in some kind of chokehold and potentially choked out. Their armor can be like compromised or pulled off. A character might like pull a helmet off someone's head or something like that. Each of those things have their own rules to adjudicate them. If somebody is being grabbed or held in some kind of chokehold or just a hold or something and they want to not be grabbed anymore, there is a role for them trying to escape from that grab. It also includes weight class modifier and stuff. And that is a rough overview of melee fighting in Eureka. Next time I'm going to do guns, which work a little differently and are a lot more deadly and dangerous to everyone involved, sometimes even the shooter. You can get a beta PDF copy of Eureka on our itch.io store page if you just Google Eureka Investigative Urban Fantasy. We'd appreciate it if you paid for it, but you can get it for free. If you want even more regularly updated versions of Eureka, plus like everything else that we made and make, you can get a $5 subscription to our Patreon account and get monthly rewards that way. That is at the Agency of Narrative Intrigue and Mystery Patreon. Even if you don't give us like a single cent though, talking about Eureka, telling your friends about Eureka, liking this video, and like playing Eureka with your friends, which you'd have to tell your friends about Eureka to play it with them. All of that stuff helps us out hugely. We don't actually have any kind of advertising budget. It's mostly just me making posts on social media and making these like videos, writing these scripts and stuff. And we thankfully have some fans helping us out with some of the editing here, or most of the editing here, or all of the editing here. And also, we've set aside some budget to pay them for that. And anyway, thank you for watching this quick start video, and I hope it has prepared you to read the rulebook and play the game. So I'm signing off.